Servus, Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. I wanted to talk about this for quite a while, but things got in the way. So now I briefly want to take a couple of minutes to talk about what was going on the eastern Austrian border in the last couple of weeks, or the last month, let's say. As you might know, and I made a video about that, is that at the Belarusian-Polish border there was a camp of funny, irregular travelers. They were invited by Belarus, so they had a tourist visa and they booked a tour that took them to Minsk, and that was the first station of their tour, and then the second one would have been Poland and then Germany. However, the Polish border guards didn't really play along and they didn't let them enter. And that was the thing that most people talked about. That was the thing that was in the news. And I want to comment a little bit on that today. But I also want to tell you, and maybe you didn't know that even though most of them were stopped at the Polish border, but there were always some of them who were getting through, and they also took other routes. And that means that during this whole time, of course, there were irregular travelers making their way into Austria via the Hungarian border, for example, all the time right now. That was not big in the news, that was not covered by the mainstream at all, but it happened. So the Austrian youth and Austrian patriots, they had a great idea. They were just taking walks along the border at night, having flashlights with them, having bright lamps with them. And that was enough for these irregular travelers to turn back and not attempt to cross the border. And in this way, they made it much more uncomfortable and much more difficult for these irregular travelers to make their way into Austria. Of course, they couldn't really block them in the way that the Polish border guards blocked them. They are just normal citizens. They were not allowed to use any means, any active means to prevent them from crossing the border. And of course, as soon as the authorities got wind of that, they were sending officers there to check what these young people, these Austrians, are doing at the border. Of course, they wanted to arrest them or find something that they shouldn't have with them. They wanted to make trouble. They wanted to prevent them from doing that. But as they are just regular citizens who were taking a walk at the border, they couldn't really do anything because that is not illegal yet. But the Austrian media and the Austrian government, the Austrian mainstream, they were furious about that. They thought of this, or they described this as some kind of atrocity, taking a walk at night with a lamp, that is now an atrocity or something, or a crime. So that is what you really have to understand. That is what you have to wrap your head around. There was law enforcement present there, but they didn't do anything against the people illegally crossing the border. They were trying to create problems for the young Austrian patriots who were just taking a walk there with lamps in order to make it a little more uncomfortable for these irregular travelers who didn't want to get spotted or who got cold feet when they saw the lamps and heard the voices. So this is also what you need to understand, that there are several things going on at the same time. On the one hand, you have this blackmailing camp that I talked about that was created at the border to Poland on Belarusian soil, and that was really meant to bus a lot of these exotics there, and then they did the usual tricks. I talked about that. They blew cigarette smoke into children's eyes, or they were scaring them or beating them or what have you in order to make them cry. And then the international media was right there to take these pictures and tell these sob stories about these poor suffering people and the evil, heartless Polish border guards who don't let them in. But that chapter is mostly over. A lot of them were flying home and they lost a lot of money in the process. I read that they paid a lot of money to the Belarusians who organized this whole thing, and then also to the local assistants or facilitators of irregular traveling. Yeah, I read that they paid like 10,000 euros or 20,000 euros, and now they have to fly back to their countries in the Middle East. It was also revealed during some stories in the media that many of them are actually middle class, that they have nice apartments and they just wanted to get into Europe somehow. So they are not fleeing from any kind of persecution and they are not poor. They probably just want to be taken care of by a welfare system that we have in Germany. But as I said, this battle is mostly fought and was won by the Polish, who refused to get Frontex involved, or who refused to make this border situation a EU operation, but they handled that as the Polish nation state. I think some other countries assisted, but it was a Polish operation at all times as far as I'm informed. So that was the one thing, and on the other hand, you have another contribution, and that is this slow trickling in of a lot of these irregular travelers at all times. And this happens all the time. That is maybe even independent of this media show, of this operation they had there at the Polish-Belarusian border. That is what is happening all the time, and they are coming not only through Greece or Italy at this point, they are also coming from Eastern Europe to Central Europe. And these are then the people who make it, for example, through Hungary, and they arrive at the Eastern Austrian border then. And as soon as they're there, well, most of them, or a large part of them, will of course make their way further to Germany, because that is where most of them want to go. Yeah, and I also want to leave a couple of words about these local helpers and facilitators. It turns out that a lot of them have, well, they're not Germans, but they have a residency in Germany. They are originally from the Levant, but they are currently living in Germany. Maybe for 6 years already. 2015 might have been the time when they arrived here, when they got to Germany. Well, and now they are renting vans and pickup trucks, and they're just hanging around in eastern Poland, waiting for someone picking them up in the woods and then driving them to Berlin. And yeah, a lot of these people actually got arrested, and a lot of these people were found out to have exactly that origin that I just outlined here. But I am sure that none of them will be deported, for example. I mean, it is obvious what they're doing here. They came here illegally, and they want to help more people do the same thing, but now even in a, well, arguably a little more aggressive and a little more outrageous way, if you take into account what we have seen, what kind of scenes were unfolding at the Polish border. It was really like a medieval siege situation that they had there. They were attacking those fences with brute force, and they were in part also, of course, I talked about that too, they were supported by Belarusian forces, but they were using blunt violence and they viciously attacked the Polish guards. Now at the end, I just want to say I have a lot of respect for these Polish border guards, not only because they defended their country and indirectly or directly actually our country too, but the highest respect I have for their discipline and for their smarts, because they were provoked in a very harsh and vicious way, and they would have had every right on the planet to strike back and strike back hard, but they didn't do that. Because they are smart. Now see, in a just world, they would have just used all the tools at their disposal and they would have fought back hard. End of story. This situation would have been over very soon. But of course, the international mainstream media was there and they would have turned that into a whole different story. And that would have put Poland under a lot of pressure, and they knew that. They were briefed about this, I am sure. They probably had orders not to do anything too harsh, and well, they had a lot of casualties to suffer as a direct result, but they still stood firm, and as an end result, yes, there were some casualties, but they defended their border and they're not seen as the extreme boogeyman. Well, of course, the international media still criticized them, but just think about what they would have written if they just had opened fire on the crowd. So that is an accomplishment that needs to be respected, I think. Alright, so let me know what you think about that in the comments down below. A big thank you goes out to all my supporters and subscribers, of course. Share this video if you find this information useful, and if you like, you can support my channel via Patreon or Subscribestar. Until next time, Servus, Kameraden!